Despite the rising popularity of EarthBound and Mother 3, thanks largely to the series' cult following and appearances in Super Smash Bros., there's always been one part of the series that's eluded me for several years: Mother. Everyone sings the praises of Ness, Jeff, Paula, Pooh, Lucas, Flint, Kumatora, Duster. Then I hear the name Ninten and do a bit of a double take. People don't really talk about or even acknowledge the existence of Mother, the game that started it all. It's Shigesato Itoi's NES baby, inspired by Dragon Quest, but set in the modern era. Just as the unusual denotation of Mother implies, the series is known for being wacky, mature, and controversial. The game is caught up in late 20th century memorabilia, with quaint suburban life pronounced by gangs, a unique fashion sense, and various elements of science fiction ranging from psychic abilities, weapons laboratories, and alien spaceships. Everything about Mother represents 80s America, what with children essentially free to roam around the countryside, the family dynamic of the father you never see because he's always off working, and the mother who stays at home, cooks for you, cares for you, and wishes you well on your adventure. This is the appeal that intrigued Shigeru Miyamoto to fund the project, seeing as the story can be interpreted as a parody of other influential RPGs such as Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. The story is about a group of children who set off on an adventure, fighting off various insects, animals, dangerous robots, and aliens, all with toy guns, baseball bats, and slingshots. Thus, Mother was released in July of 1989 in Japan for the Famicom and wouldn't see an English release until June of 2015 on the Wii U eShop, rebranded as EarthBound Beginnings. The story goes that the game was translated for Western audiences, but never released because the SNES was hot off the market. Nintendo figured the NES was dead, rendering Mother unprofitable in their eyes. Gamers outside of Japan would have to wait until EarthBound on the SNES to get their Mother fix. Enter the Mother fan community, who got a hold of the translated version of Mother and released it to the internet titled EarthBound 0. The same community would go on to fully translate Mother 3, the GBA port of Mother 1 and 2, and release a more refined translation of Mother, complete with a lowered encounter rate, a lowered amount of EXP needed to level up, and slightly updated visuals. This ROM hack is known as the Mother 25th Anniversary Edition, and it's the version I will be primarily looking at for this video. It is frequently touted as the definitive way to play Mother, and so that's what I'll be focusing my attention on. Some of you may wonder why I won't be covering the original, so allow me to explain why. The original is plagued by high encounter rates, a profuse amount of grinding, and a somewhat inconsistent localization meant to fit better with Western audiences, all of which I can't stand. I feel that's good enough, and most of you were probably able to deduce how I felt about those aspects of the game without watching further. Mother 25th Anniversary fixes some of the issues plaguing nearly every NES RPG at the time, giving me a strong incentive to see it through to the end, and allowing the video to focus on the more unique aspects of Mother. Plus, seeing as I have to rely on an unofficial translation for Mother 3, I don't see why I can't do the same with Mother 1. Of course, I'll still be able to reference the original release because I'm aware of the changes, and though I haven't played the original, it isn't hard to compare the two based on what I've watched in the past. With all that said, it's about time we take a long, hard look at an often overlooked entry into an otherwise prolific franchise. You start the game by naming the cast of characters, officially known as Ninten, Anna, Jeff, and Teddy. You also get to pick Ninten's favorite food, officially prime rib, but I opted to put pizza because it ultimately doesn't matter. It only influences the food your mother will feed you when you swing by your home. Mother doesn't provide you with these names, you can only find that information in the game's manual, so the onus is largely up to each individual player to fill in the blanks. I chose to stay canonical, but nothing is stopping me from naming each character after people in my life, which I anticipate was one of the goals of this game. Seeing as it takes place in the modern era and stars a group of heroes no older than the age of 12, I'd imagine filling the shoes of Ninten, Anna, and Jeff was prioritized far more than in other RPGs. Even Teddy, despite being presumably older and only sticking around for a few minutes at most, could be modeled after an older sibling character. Giving a name to a character in a game like Final Fantasy was largely used as a mechanic in traditional RPGs to heighten the sense of escapism. To craft a character in a fantasy world, and connect with that character to slay dragons and save the world, offering an exciting avenue to actualize the overactive youth imagination. Whereas Mother uses this as a means for players to reflect their lives onto the game world. This creates something more akin to a life simulation than an escapist fantasy, even when that life simulation is exaggerated in many of the same ways as its contemporaries. You could still place yourself in the shoes of the fighter or black mage, but it's less a simulation of yourself and more an ideal version of what you wish you were. Again, in stark contrast to its contemporaries, Mother takes advantage of this simulation to lessen the impact of your adventure. You wake up in your bedroom as your lamp comes to life and attacks you. After dealing with the lamp, you check on your sisters, and you fight your sister's doll. However, once you've dealt with that, everything returns to normal. Your mother and sisters don't question what happened, they simply thank you. You get a call from your father letting you know you need to go on an adventure and that you should check the basement for aid in that quest. So, off you go, traveling to different towns, talking to the townsfolk, fighting snakes, rats, dogs, hippies, zombies, flying saucers, aliens, the works. It's odd, though, for what's clearly attempting to be a parody of the NES RPG, Mother ends up feeling similar in many ways. The legend of Ninten and his psychic abilities are spread far and wide, and you recruit Anna because she foretells your meeting long before it occurs. Everyone in the game seems more than willing to help you out, and the 20th century flavor is only that, a flavor. You contract colds from strangers, you get tricked into underage drinking, which leads to your arrest, where you're forced to rest for the night until you apologize and promise you'll never drink again. Teddy only joins your party after you have a one-on-one fist fight to prove your bravery. But none of this changes how the game plays with the traditional NPC. They're still strangers, walking around in copy-pasta suburbs, spouting off about random shit that may or may not pertain to the task at hand. The only difference is that they're modeled after the stereotypical 1980s American instead of the accommodating townsfolk of the Middle Ages. It's an admittedly unique flavor, but it never becomes anything more. Your player characters rarely interact, yet the game attempts to explore the bond between them in fairly shallow ways. Teddy is supposed to be the guardian of the group, the older, tougher member, while Ninten is the group-imposed leader who has the affection of Anna, even though they've only exchanged 3 or 4 lines of dialogue. Jeff, who speaks the first time you meet him, goes silent for the rest of the game until the end when he has to step in for Teddy. I mean, hell, even the way you meet your party members is stupid. You get explosives for Jeff, so he'll leave his trash can on the roof of his school, walk into one of the classrooms, and blow it up with a bottle rocket. After that, he seems intent on following you to the ends of the earth for being the first person not to bully him. You meet Anna inside of a church, where she tells you that she saw Ninten and her meeting many times before, and professes her love to Ninten a few hours later. You meet Teddy by dancing in a club, fist-fighting with him, until he joins you so he can go avenge his parents. These characters exist on a TV tropes page somewhere. Look, it's an NES RPG plot. A group of youngsters travel around the world, fight off aliens, and save everyone, all while offering little to no story elements beyond that. Mother relies heavily on its unique flavor with little regard to any of its other elements. It presents a refreshing setting, yet on a fundamental level, it offers nothing more than a Final Fantasy or a Dragon Quest. These RPGs are about progression, gaining levels by defeating monsters, talking to townspeople to figure out what to do next, buying new weapons, armor, items, all to further your goal of saving the world and all of its inhabitants. You see, the problem with calling Mother a parody of other RPGs isn't that it adopts many of the same tropes, but that it adopts many of the same tropes with virtually nothing meaningful to say about them. Your objective is to find 8 melodies, all found in unique locations across the world. However, the game presents them as optional. You aren't told where to get them outside of the occasional context clue, if you happen to come across the right NPC. Take the first melody, for instance. It's in your sister's room, and you get it by checking the doll on her shelf. It sure is a good thing I felt the need to explore my house, or I would have missed the first piece to a crucial puzzle. I admit it's hard to miss if you go into RPGs with a klepto mindset, but as the game goes on, can you really afford to keep a klepto mindset? Are you willing to talk to every single NPC, explore every house, search every cave, every minuscule room, all to find another piece of the puzzle? You could argue it's possible to eventually find all 8 of the melodies, and I wouldn't even fight you on that. It is possible, and most of them are pretty easily found, but the lengths you have to go to get there are far too obtuse. Take the 5th melody, easily the most egregious of them all. You get it from a cactus in the middle of the Yucca Desert. A lone, meaningless cactus. You're given a few hints, again provided you're a kleptomaniac. Some of the nearby townsfolk talk about a cactus in the desert, and taking a ride on a plane in the middle of the desert, only the first available ride, mind you. The plane circles around a cactus several times to indicate its importance. I understand it's a hint in retrospect, but I didn't see the importance of it on my first and only viewing of the plane ride, and I ignored the townsfolk dialogue, chalked it up to flavor text that led nowhere, which this game has an awful lot of. That was a huge mistake, and when I finally learned the importance of that cactus, I wasn't too happy. None of this matters if you don't know to look out for the melodies in the first place, and you really have no incentive to look for them. You meet the Queen of Magicant, and you learn about the importance of the 8 melodies from her and the denizens of Magicant, but it's impossible to know whether this is main quest material or side quest material. To me, it seemed like a side objective, considering how hidden and spread out each of the melodies are, and the game doesn't exactly reinforce their importance. NPCs mostly string you along a thinly veiled path, from town to town, party member to party member, and it was a path I thought was mostly correct. Turns out that path is designed to keep you in range of each melody, to make sure you're always in the vicinity of a melody, but the game never stresses that. I mean, suppose you don't find the first melody, where are you even going to learn of them? From Magicant? At that point, it just sounds like more flavor text, seeing as you haven't found a melody yet. The second melody? You learn it from a fucking duck. And you can't even learn it until you go to the top floor of the department store, buy a specific item so you can take that item to the duck and learn the melody. The third melody? You get it at the zoo by checking the placard of the singing monkey. Doesn't sound too hard to miss, it's a pretty massive block of text. The problem? You only learn the melody after defeating the boss of the area. It may force you to backtrack, but I didn't think to check the placard again, so I missed out on it. I think you get the point. This obscurity isn't even the worst problem on its own, especially in the modern age when you can look up a guide on the internet at any given moment. It isn't ideal, of course, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend I couldn't complete the game, because I definitely could after I looked up what the hell I was supposed to be doing. No, there's something worse here, something so rotten, sick to the core that it sours the entire experience. That rotten core is built around the 8 melodies. Everything about Mother is crafted to infuriate me, and it all traces back to these melodies. When you sit back and ruminate on the structure of the game, it all becomes so clear. What do you do to track down all 8 melodies, or at first, to reach the end of the game? Well, you run around to various towns, threaded along by the dialogue from townsfolk, visiting dungeons, caves, Magicant, all sorts of places. During this travel, you'll be fighting enemies, typical RPG fare. For each step you take outside of a town, you have a chance of running into an enemy, and the rate at which this occurs is dependent on which version of the game you're playing. If you're playing EarthBound Beginnings or EarthBound 0, the encounter rate will be extremely high. Like, every couple of steps is a new encounter kinda high. The 25th Anniversary Edition cuts down on this quite significantly, to the point where encounters actually feel somewhat rare. This high encounter rate ruined the pace of the original when you're interrupted every 5 seconds with a random encounter, especially when those random encounters are somewhat hard to run away from, and because the game's design is predicated on making you walk around huge chunks of space. One glance at the level design and it's easy to see how frustrating it is to explore, or just to find the correct path forward, because there are so many twists and turns, bridges that lead nowhere, rooms off the beaten path with absolutely nothing in them. All, I posit, to increase the frequency with which you encounter enemies. This is a problem that could have made my playthrough of the Anniversary Edition worse, but this isn't the only part of the battle system that feels broken. There's another problem the Anniversary Edition fails to solve, and that's the difficulty balancing. Each enemy runs the gambit of strange, as I mentioned before. All sorts of kooky designs, but they also vary wildly in power level. Some enemies are a complete joke, like the dogs, snakes, flies, mostly the enemies that come in packs. But there are some fierce enemies waiting in the woodwork to jump out and obliterate your party. You have bears, crocodiles, cars, trucks, all incredibly dangerous, and you won't know until you face the brunt of an attack. I mean, Jesus, these enemies will take out half your health in one swing, and many of them have the ability to attack twice in one turn, adding insult to injury. If you aren't prepared to take a hit like that, prepare to see the game over screen several times. Luckily, the checkpoint system is very forgiving. Your progress is saved in that moment, so you never have to worry about losing any of the items you've obtained, or the progress you've made in a dungeon, or anything of the sort. The real problem is where you respawn. I haven't really been able to pinpoint where you end up, but that doesn't really pertain to the argument. All you need to know is that you respawn back at a drugstore located in any of the towns. The real problem isn't where you spawn, it's the result of dying over and over again to enemies you don't stand a chance against. First off, you and your entire party die before you ever see a game over screen. Even if Ninten dies, as long as one of your other party members is alive, you can simply take control of them for the time being. So, every time you wipe, your entire party is dead, except for Ninten. To revive them, you need to pay a fee for each individual you wish to revive, a price which varies from town to town. You lose most of the money you're carrying whenever you die anyway, which is why all of your money is deposited in an ATM by your dad. I usually kept my money in an ATM until I needed to buy something. There are ATMs in every store you enter, so it's very convenient. My concerns come with the costs of reviving party members, which can run you a lot of money, in addition to the price for items, gear, weapons, or other general expenses. You've got to pay for train tickets to travel the world. You need money to cure sicknesses, which you can contract from random NPCs and enemies. If you die a lot, all of this money feels like it's being funneled into a sinkhole. Pay for your teammates or you won't be able to get them more experience, and without their help in battle, you'll surely die again. Buy more items so you can heal easier outside of battle without wasting PSI points. Surely you'll need weapons too, but most of them are extremely pricey, so you can probably only settle for the half-decent stuff, and certainly not for your entire party. Given the frequency with which you often die to bullshit one-shots, this is far from a rare occurrence. Your wallet is going to be running dry 24/7, with barely enough to keep your party alive. That doesn't even factor in the travel time from the store you wake up in to the place you were at when you died. Maybe you died 5 feet away from the town you spawned in, and in that case it isn't a big issue. But say you're in a dungeon where many of the tough enemies and boss fights are. When you die, you respawn and you have to walk all the way back to where you were. What happens when you die in a huge labyrinthian dungeon like Duncan's Laboratory? Here's what happens. You spawn in a town somewhat far away, make the trek back to Duncan's Laboratory following the train tracks, until you hang a left for a detour, make your way through the long, never-ending, winding pathways that lead to Duncan's Laboratory, and hope to God you remember the exact sequence of ladders you climbed to make it where you did before. All while having to deal with encounters which, while not frequent, are just as annoying when they pop up and have an equal chance of eradicating your party, since fleeing a battle has a pretty likely chance to fail. Just imagine finally making it to the end of this winding labyrinth, dying to something you had no control over, and having to make your way back from all the way outside the dungeon. And when I say it's labyrinthian, I'm not exaggerating. There are maybe 15 to 20 different ladders, each leading to tons and tons of areas, some with items, half of which mean absolutely nothing and you have no room for in your paltry inventory, and some with nothing at all. Each floor looks the same, there's virtually nothing to distinguish one floor from the next, and it gets to the point where figuring out where you are in the first place is troubling. When you think of Duncan's Laboratory in the strictest sense, it's a maze. Only this maze has random combat encounters that could throw you out at any minute, and in the original version, it also destroys the pacing by making you fight enemies every 5 to 10 seconds, stretching the game to its absolute limit. Mount Holy Lowly, or Mount Itoi in the original, is the worst example. It's the same problem, dozens of similar looking rooms with winding pathways that lead absolutely everywhere you can imagine. Except this place is worse, much, much worse. Not only is it longer than Duncan's laboratory by a considerable margin, but it also maintains the orientation of the camera after every entrance you walk through. Say you walk through this entrance inside the mountain, you'll end up in another room, right? The camera will turn 180 degrees so that your character is facing the camera, meaning the entire room is flipped to accommodate that. Can you imagine how absolutely confusing that is? Especially when you factor in that some rooms have multiple entrances, which means you could potentially enter a room you've already been in from the opposite side and it'll look completely different. This has looped me in circles several times, all while I thought I was exploring new ground. Getting through Mount Holy Lowly is pure luck, and as I mentioned before, the random encounters and fear of death only exacerbate this issue. So what does it mean? Grinding. Despite the 25th Anniversary Edition fixing several key issues, such as having new party members start at comparable levels instead of level 1, and decreasing the amount of EXP you need to level up, all of which are welcome, it doesn't change the fact that grinding is somewhat necessary to survive. You need to be at least level 25 anyway to get one of the melodies, which is going to require grinding if you're playing the 25th Anniversary Edition because encounters are so infrequent, and because you'll probably be attempting to run away from the bullshit hard encounters. When I got to Mount Holy Lowly, my party levels ranged from around 19 to 23. This meant some grinding so that I was high enough level to face the dragon, but it also means grinding even higher so that I'm a sufficient level to survive the dragon in the first place. Level 25 is just the minimum, it's not necessarily a recommended level. Quick note, my friend Miles, known on YouTube as American Hikikomori, informed me that Itoi and his team were so constricted by their deadline, they didn't actually balance Mount Holy Lowly in the original release. They figured players would be able to grind to get past it, a statement that does not in any way trigger me. Also, he told me to plug him, so there you go, Miles. Are you happy? This grinding phase highlighted just how mundane the combat really is, because in principle, I don't hate grinding. You have some options at least. Attacking, defending, running, using one of your many PSI abilities, which can only be used by Ninten and Ana, I should mention. The PSI abilities can be quite useful. You have life up, defense down, fire, freeze, thunder, beam, even abilities to cure colds, paralysis, asthma, the works. There's a world where this combat system takes advantage of this huge roster of PSI abilities, but unfortunately, this is not that world. Ninten and Lloyd don't even get most of these abilities, only Ana does. Yeah, Ninten gets life up, defense down, all that stuff, but Ana gets stronger healing, offensive PSI abilities, the ability to revive dead teammates, which is super useful, and a variety of cures to status ailments. Ana is by far the most useful party member, but it's only really because she deals a lot of damage and can both revive and heal, essentially outdoing both Ninten and Lloyd combined. Ninten can still keep up with some subpar healing and some powerful regular attack output, but Lloyd, he doesn't stand a chance. He does pitiful damage, and his specialty is using special consumable items like bombs and bottle rockets. Keyword, consumable. Consumable items in an 8-slot inventory, which is already probably being used for key items, that is if you don't want to keep them on Ninten. Also, Lloyd can simply keep up with Ninten's damage output. You better hope to God you can do enough damage because enemies will hit like a truck. Most of the time they default to hitting you with everything they have, only occasionally stopping to summon allies or raise their defenses so they can force you to waste a turn lowering their defenses or to keep you attacking at a lower rate. It's all to stall you, to make sure the enemies can pound out their powerful attacks and destroy your party. If you're in critical condition, you'll need to use both Ninten and Ana to keep everyone alive, since all of your healing abilities are single target. This often meant that Lloyd becomes the default damage dealer, and I'm sure you can imagine how well that goes considering his lackluster combat potential. Winning battles felt more like luck of the draw, that I got enough smash attacks to end the battle quickly before I ran out of PSI points and my entire party died. A happy accident, not a tactical victory. If that wasn't enough, you basically have a button that will play the game for you. If you press auto, the characters will attack as they see fit, unless a party member has low HP, in which case either Ninten or Ana will heal them. This kinda sucks because Ana has a miserable attack output and auto will never have her using her PSI abilities, but for about half the game, and many of the later encounters with enemies who are much weaker than you, auto is a surefire command to make sure you can sit back and watch the battle play out, and you only need to worry about healing afterwards. Unless something goes wrong, that is, and then you'll be spending another night in the infirmary. The auto command is a band-aid on the need to grind and to make the easier fights end faster, though it has the unfortunate effect of rendering many of the battles unfulfilling, seeing as it becomes a waste of time the minute you hit that auto button. If there's an easy encounter in front of you, just hit auto so the battle will resolve itself, until you run into a tough enemy, and then you can worry about what PSI abilities you should use until you're low on PSI and need to run back to the hotel for a rest to replenish your PSI points. Or, in my case, I just killed myself so I can get there quicker. You could use a rare PSI stone, which has many uses, but only replenishes about 12 PSI points per use, has a finite amount of uses, and you need to navigate your inventory for every use. Press the start button, move over to goods, use the PSI stone, read the text box telling you how much it restored, and do it all over again. This is if you even have a PSI stone to begin with. It's the rarest item in the game. You'll only come across 2 or 3 of them if you're lucky. If you don't have one or don't want to waste your PSI stone, it's back to town for you. The game even has the audacity to ensure you spend more money upon dying. After you die, you lose all of your PSI points, meaning you'll need to spend even more money to spend a night at a hotel to get your PSI back. I mean, you eventually get the ability to warp, so at least you can warp back to towns to get that PSI back fairly quickly. You're allowed to warp to every named town, so it's a very nice addition. Except that warping is a completely optional, completely missable feature that just so happens to be a pain in the fucking ass to operate. You need a ton of space in front of you because once you use it, you and your party run exponentially faster until you hit warp speed, when your party will warp all the way to the town you selected. If you run into anything during this process, you will be stopped in your tracks and forced to start again. Sounds pretty minor until you throw it into the machine with the rest of the elements that crank out frustration at every corner. It all leads back to progression, figuring out what you need to do, actually doing it, and dealing with the consequences of doing it. You can trace it all back to the simple question of, how do I progress? I've been racking my brain trying to figure out if there's a silver lining to all of this, and I just can't figure it out. I am convinced that Mother is designed to churn out a frustrating experience for the worst, and everything about that experience reinforces this frustration. The grinding, the difficulty balancing, the obfuscated progression, the mundane battle system. I'm just left wondering how this game was ever considered a parody when it falls into the same shameless traps as its contemporaries. I may have found the answer though, and for me it explains quite a lot. Mother is Final Fantasy, it is Dragon Quest, it is the traditional NES RPG, but in theme, it isn't. It isn't set in the Middle Ages, it isn't dealing with folk tales or goblins or gold or mystic warriors. It's set in the late 20th century, starring a group of children going on an adventure through what is essentially the United States. There are cars, planes, tanks, cities, you eat food and medicine to recover your health, you fight with baseball bats and toy guns, you have a fist fight with a gang member. I mentioned this all before, but you have to admit it's quite the unique flavor for an RPG, especially at the time. It's more relatable, it's easier to place yourself in the shoes of Ninten and his group of ragtag adventurers, and most importantly, it's a fresh idea, something no one had seen before. I'd be willing to bet this was enough to mask the fundamental flaws of the game. It's also a theme I greatly enjoy. It is different, and it often strikes me as strange or mature. It has a quirky feel to it that most other games don't have, and I can see, at least in some of the dialogue, where the game is trying to parody other RPGs at the time. I can even admire that to some extent. However, it uses the exact same framework as other RPGs at the time, without anything meaningful to say about the genre as a whole through its mechanics. It doesn't raise any questions about RPGs that wouldn't have already been raised by Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. It has grinding, frequent random encounters, bullshit difficulty balancing spurred by a need to grind and an inconsequential battle system, and a world design that ensures you'll be running into enemy after enemy and getting lost at every turn. You can't be a parody of something while also being that thing. What I'm essentially trying to express is that Mother has so many core issues that simply polishing it up doesn't hide the fact that it's fundamentally flawed. Lowering the encounter rate, lowering the necessary amount of grinding, even speeding up the battle text, it doesn't fix the game because the game is broken. That's largely why it doesn't matter which version I cover or talk about in this video. Maybe I could have covered the original, and maybe that would have been a little more authentic. I can assure you all that would change is that I'd probably be a little more pissed off than I am now, and the video would probably take a little longer to make. It wouldn't change my script, it wouldn't change my tone, and it wouldn't change the outcome. Mother is fatally flawed. It pains me to say this, but it might be one of the worst games I've ever played. I don't play many bad games, so take that statement with a grain of salt, but I struggle to find anything redeeming about Mother besides its flavor, its concept. None of this is to blame the translation itself. I think it does a wonderful job polishing the game. It makes it more tolerable and even refines the translation to better fit the Japanese release, which I'm a pretty big fan of. There are a bunch of quality of life assurances made in the 25th anniversary edition, and I'm very glad it exists to give curious eyes an easier way to experience the game without all the wasted fluff that comes with repetitive encounters and grinding. It's just unfortunate that what I ended up seeing, even once you rough out the edges, is a waste of time. As you can imagine, it didn't end there. Mother was at least successful enough to warrant a sequel on the SNES titled, well, you all know what it's called, EarthBound. This is the cult hit, the fan favorite, the game everyone rallied around for years because of its rarity. It influenced the childhoods of many a gamer and is likely the reason the fan community is so strong to this day. I'm excited to see why that is, and I really need to wash the taste of Mother from my mouth. Join me then, if you will. Until then, that's the end of the video. If you liked it and want to see more videos like this, consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, but if you can't contribute, please don't feel pressured. I welcome fans of all types. My Patreon should and always will be completely optional. All I ask is that if you can support me, feel free. Just don't break the bank. Here's something you can do free of charge. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Agree, disagree, just lay it all on me. I value engagement far more than I value my views, so please, if you want to yell at me, if you'd like to offer criticism, anything like that, you know where my comment section is. Well, until EarthBound, I hope you all enjoyed the video. My name has been KingK, and I certainly hope you have some well-deserved fun today.